Okay, we're on page 279. Mahood, Hungary, 2015, 17 days from home. They came for Mahood and his father again the next morning. This time, they'd take them to a crowded refugee camp in a cold, muddy field surrounded by a wire fence. Multicolored camping tents stood among heaps of trash and discarded clothes, and Hungarian soldiers in blue uniforms and white surgical masks guarded the entrances and exits. There was only one real building, a windowless, cinder-brick warehouse filled with row and row of metal cots. Mahood and his father found Mom and Walid among the newly arrived refugees, and they shared a tearful reunion. They were each given a blanket and a bottle of water and found cots for themselves, but when the food was delivered, they missed out. The Hungarian soldiers stood at one end of the room, tossing sandwiches into the crowd like zookeepers, throwing food to the animals in a cage, and Mahood and his family didn't know enough to rush to the tables to catch their lunch. Mahood expected his father to laugh it off, but he wasn't joking anymore. Instead, Dad sat on his cot, his face and arms purple and bruised, staring off into space. Getting beaten and thrown into prison by the Hungarians had finally broken his spirit. It scared Mahood. Of the 4 members of his family who were left, he was the only one who wasn't broken. His mother had snapped the moment she handed her daughter away, and now she wandered the maze of mattresses and blankets in a detention center, asking people if they'd seen or heard of a baby named Hana. Mahood's brother, Walid, was broken too, but unlike his mother, he had broken piece by piece over time, like someone snapping off little bites of a chocolate bar until there was nothing left. He lay listless on the foam mattress, disinterested in the card games or soccer games the other children were playing. Whatever childish joy they had once possessed had been sucked out until there was nothing left, and now his father was dead inside too. Mahood fumed. Why were they even here? Why did the Hungarians care if they were just passing through? Why had they taken them all the way to the Austrian border only to throw them in a detention center? It felt personal somehow, like the whole country was conspiring to keep them from finding a real home. There were the policemen with guns at every door. They were more like prisoners than refugees. And then we got out of here just to go back to Serbia, back to a country that didn't want them. After everything they had been through, they weren't going to make it to Germany, after all. But Mahood wasn't ready to give up. He wanted life to be like it was before the war had come. They couldn't go back to Syria, not now. Mahood knew that, but there was no reason they couldn't make a new life for themselves somewhere else, start over, be happy again. And Mahood wanted to do whatever it took to make that happen, or at least try. But making something happen meant drawing attention, being visible, and being invisible was so much easier. It was useful, too, like Aleppo or Serbia or here in Hungary, but sometimes it was just as useful to be visible, like in Turkey or Greece. The reverse was true, too, though. Being invisible had hurt them as much as being visible had. Mahood frowned. That was what the real truth of it, wasn't it? Whether you were visible or invisible, it was all about how other people reacted to you. Good and bad things happened either way. If you were invisible, the bad people couldn't hurt you. That was true. But the good people couldn't help you either. If you stayed invisible here, did everything you were supposed to do and never made waves, you would disappear from the eyes of the minds of all the good people out there, and they could help you get back to life. It was better to be visible, to stand up, to stand out. Mahood watched as a door on a nearby wall opened and a group of men and women in light blue caps and vests with the letters UN written on them came inside, escorted by some important-looking Hungarian soldiers. Mahood knew that the UN was the United Nations, the same group that had been helping people at the Kilis refuge camp. The UN carried clipboards and cell phones and made notes and took pictures of the living conditions. This place was run by the Hungarians, not the UN, so Mahood guessed they were there to observe, to document the living conditions of the refugees. Mahood decided right then and there that he was going to make sure the observers saw him. Mahood got up from his cot and walked to the door. All he had to do was push his way through and he would be outside. But a Hungarian soldier stood guard next to it. She wore a blue uniform, a red cap, and a thick black leather belt that had a nightstick and had all kinds of compartments. Over her shoulder she carried a small automatic rifle on a strap and a barrel pointed at the gym floor. The guard ignored Mahood. He stood right in front of her, but she looked over him. Past him, Mahood was invisible as long as he did what he was supposed to, and as long as he was invisible, he was safe, and she was comfortable. It was time for both of those things to change. Mahood took a deep breath and pushed the door open. Kunk, kunk. The sound echoed loudly in the big room, and suddenly all the kids stopped playing, and all the adults looked up from the mattress at him. It was green outside and sunny, and the first Mahood had to squint to see. "Hey!" the guard cried. She saw him now, didn't she? The UN observers, too. "Stop! No! Not allowed!" the soldier said in a bad Arabic. She struggled to find the right words and said something in Hungarian that Mahood didn't understand. She started to raise her gun at him, and then she glanced up and saw the frowns on the faces of the UN observers. Mahood stepped outside. The woman looked around at the other guards and called out to them as if asking what to do. Mahood took another step, and another, and soon he was away from the building, walking toward the road. Walid ran through the door after him, followed by the rest of the children. The Hungarian guards yelled after them, but they didn't do anything to stop them. "Mahood!" Walid said, panting as he ran alongside his brother. His eyes were bright and alive for the first time Mahood could remember. "Mahood, what are you doing?" "I'm not staying in that place and waiting for them to send me back to Serbia. Come on," Mahood said. "We're walking to Austria." We are on page 285, Joseph, in France, 1940, 1 year, 1 month, 10 days from home. Gunfire crackled, an artillery shell whistled overhead and hit with a shuddering thump somewhere nearby. Ruthie cried, and Joseph's mother hugged her close. Joseph peeked out the window. They were hiding in a tiny schoolhouse in a village called Bornay, somewhere south of Bourges in France. The desks were all in perfect rows, and a long-forgotten assignment was still written on the chalkboard. It was dark outside, and the trees surrounding the schoolhouse made it even darker. That was good. It helped them hide, but it also made spotting German stormtroopers harder. Joseph ducked back down inside, and his eyes fell on a map of Europe on the wall, the various countries shaded in different colors. How wrong that the map was now, just a year after he and his family had come to France as refugees. Germany had absorbed Austria and conquered Poland and Czechoslovakia soon after. Holland and Belgium and Denmark had fallen to Hitler, and the Nazis occupied the northern half of France, including Paris. All of France had surrendered, but there were still pockets of free France forces resisting the Nazis throughout the countryside where Joseph and his family were now. The only refugees from the St. Louis were still safe, Joseph realized, were the ones who had made it to Great Britain, though word was that Hitler was going to try to cross the English Channel any day now. Joseph and his mother and sister were trying to get to Switzerland in the hope that the Swiss would give them refuge. They'd made it this far traveling by night, sleeping in hay barns and out in the fields under the stars, but the Nazis had finally caught up to them. A light played across the window above him, and Joseph chanced to look out again. Stormtroopers, headed toward the school. "They're coming," Joseph told his mother. "We have to go." His mother picked up Ruthie and headed for the door, but Joseph stopped her. There was only one door to the schoolhouse, and Nazis would be using it. "No, this way," he said. Joseph kept low as he scurried to the back wall of the classroom. There was a window there. They could climb out and run for the woods. He tried the handle. It was stuck. Joseph looked over his shoulder. He could see the beam of a flashlight in the hall outside, could hear the familiar German language of his homeland. They had to get out of there. Joseph threw his elbow against the glass, and it shattered. That brought a cry from the hallway. Joseph knocked the rest of the glass out of the window in a panic. He felt his coat sleeve rip, felt something cold and sharp against his skin, but he didn't have time to think about that. He helped his mother out first, then handed Ruthie out through the window. "Go, go!" Joseph said before he was even all the way out the window, and his mother picked up Ruthie and ran for the darkness of the woods. None of them carried suitcases anymore. Those had been left behind long ago, but they all still wear their coats, even though in the heat of summer, his mother had insisted. The only thing any of them still carried was Bitsy, the little stuffed animal Ruthie had never parted with. It was tucked tightly under her arm. Joseph leaped down from the window, stumbled, got back up, and ran. "There! There!" The beam of the flashlight found him. A pistol cracked, and a bullet blew the bark of the trees less than a meter away from him. Joseph stumbled again in panic, righted himself, and kept running. Behind him, the little stormtroopers were yelling to each other, barking like dogs after the fox. They were on the scent now, and one let up, not until Joseph and his family had been caught. "There's a house up ahead!" his mother yelled over her shoulder. She swerved onto a small dirt lane, and Joseph overtook her, beating her to the door. It was a little French country house with 2 windows on either side of a double door in the middle of a chimney on one side. Joseph caught a faint whiff of smoke from the kitchen fire, and a curtain fluttered in the window. Someone was inside. Joseph pounded on the door. He glanced over his shoulder. 3 flashlights' beams were bouncing up the lane toward them. "Help! Please help us!" Joseph whispered frantically, still pounding. No one answered, and no lights came on inside. "Halt!" came a young man's voice. Joseph spun around. There were 4 German soldiers behind them. 3 of them pointed flashlights at them, making Joseph squint. He could still see well enough to know that 2 of them had rifles pointed at them. A third carried a pistol. "Hands up! Put the child down," the stormtrooper told Joseph's mother. Ruthie tried to cling to her, but Mama did as she was told. Dully, Joseph realized that he'd lost some feeling in his right arm and that his sleeve was coated in blood. He'd cut himself on the window glass badly. He squeezed this place where his arm had grazed the glass, and the pain was so blinding it almost made him pass out. Ruthie had her head down, crying, but she raised her little bunny's white arm and said, "Heil Hitler!" One of the soldiers laughed as he blinked the pain of his arm away. Joseph thought maybe the soldiers would let them go, but one of them said, "Papers." They were in trouble now for sure. Their papers had the big letter J stamped all over them for Jew. We don't have papers, Mama said. One of the soldiers gestured at her, and a stormtrooper with a rifle marched up to them to check their coat pockets. He quickly found the papers she carried for her and Ruthie just as easily as Joseph found his. The soldier brought them back to the man with a flashlight, and he unfolded them. Jews, the man said. From Berlin. You've run a long way from home. You have no idea, Joseph thought. We're going to Switzerland, Ruthie said. Hush, Ruthie, Joseph hissed. Switzerland? Is that so? Well, I'm afraid we cannot allow that, the soldier said. You will be taken to a concentration camp like the rest of the Jews. Why, Joseph thought, why bother hunting us down and taking us back to prison? If the Nazis want the Jews gone so badly, why don't they just let us keep going? One of the soldiers came toward them with a gun. No, wait, Joseph's mother cried. I have money. Richmarks. French francs. She stumbled inside her shirt where she kept their hidden money. The bills fluttered to the ground. The soldiers moved the bills around with his feet and made a sound. It's not enough, I'm afraid. Joseph's heart sank. At the chance she might really be able to buy their way out, Joseph's mother became hysterical. Wait, I have jewelry, I have diamonds. She yanked Ruthie's coat, pulling it overhead. Mama, what are you doing? Ruthie cried. Joseph's mother ripped at the seams the way his father had when he rent the garments of old Professor Wheeler from the ship. From Ruthie's coat she pulled something that glittered in the light of the electric torches. Earrings. The diamond earrings Joseph's father had bought for her their anniversary 1 year. Joseph remembered Papa giving them to her, remembered the smile on Mama's face, the light in her eyes, both long gone now. Mama had sewn her earrings into the lining of Ruthie's coat. That way she had never let Ruthie take it off. The soldier took the earrings from Joseph's mother and examined them in the light. Joseph held his breath. Maybe they would let his mother buy their way out of it after all. Everything I was able to keep, his mother said. It's all yours. Just please let us go. These are very nice, the soldier said, but I think there is only enough here to buy freedom for one of your children. But that's all I have left, Mama said. The soldier looked up at her expectantly. At first, Joseph didn't understand what he wanted. They didn't have anything else to give him. But then the Nazi pulled Joseph and Ruthie to him and turned them around for Mama to see. And that's when Joseph understood. The Nazis didn't care how much money they had, how much jewels. It wasn't about that. He was playing with them. This was another game, like a cat playing with a mouse before he ate it. I think there is only enough here to buy freedom for one of your children. One of Rachel Landau's children would go free, and one of her children would go into the camps. The Nazi soldier smiled at Joseph's mother. You choose.